The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed in my mother's perfect, cursive handwriting. Victoria Elizabeth Thompson and Lieutenant Commander Michael James Sullivan request the honor of your presence. I stared at the heavy cardstock for a full minute before tossing it into the trash bin beside my desk. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Alexandra Thompson, and I hadn't spoken to my family in 3 years. The envelope sat in that trash can for 2 days while I tried to pretend it didn't exist. But every time I walked past my desk, I could feel it there, like a splinter working its way deeper under my skin. On Thursday morning, I finally retrieved it, smoothing out the creases I'd made in my anger. The wedding was set for Saturday afternoon at St. Michael's Cathedral in downtown Richmond, Virginia. Reception to follow at the Jefferson Hotel. Black tie optional. RSVP by May 15th. Today was May 20th, so apparently my attendance wasn't particularly anticipated. At the bottom of the invitation in smaller print was a handwritten note from my mother. Please try to behave appropriately. This day isn't about you. Mother. Not love, Mom, or hope to see you there, or even just mother. Just that cold, surgical reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. The problem child. The disappointment. The one who'd embarrassed them all by choosing a path they couldn't understand or control. I was sitting in my office at the Pentagon, 3 floors underground in a section most people didn't know existed. The walls were lined with monitors displaying satellite feeds from 6 different continents, and the soft hum of encrypted communications equipment filled the air like electronic white noise. My security clearance was so high that most of my colleagues couldn't even know what I did for a living. What they knew was that I was Commander Alexandra Thompson, U.S. Navy, assigned to something called Administrative Coordination. What they didn't know was that I ran the most classified counterintelligence operation in the Western Hemisphere, that I'd spent the last 8 years preventing terrorist attacks that would never make the news because they never happened. My assistant, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, knocked on the doorframe. "Ma'am, you have the briefing with Admiral Peterson in 10 minutes. I looked up from the invitation, quickly sliding it into my desk drawer. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Any updates on the Jakarta situation?" "Asset extracted successfully at 0300 local time. No casualties, minimal exposure. The Indonesian government will never know we were there." Another crisis averted. Another disaster prevented. Another day of keeping the world spinning while remaining completely invisible. It was exactly the kind of work I'd dreamed of doing since I was 12 years old. Reading Tom Clancy novels in my bedroom while my sister practiced her violin downstairs. Victoria had always been the golden child, 2 years younger but somehow always 2 steps ahead in our parents' eyes. She graduated summa cum laude from Duke with a degree in international relations, then landed a prestigious position at the State Department. She spoke 4 languages fluently, played piano like a concert performer, and had never, not once in her entire life, done anything that disappointed our parents. I, on the other hand, had been a source of constant anxiety from the moment I announced I was joining the Navy instead of pursuing the law degree they'd already planned for me. "The Navy?" my father had said, the word hanging in the air of our pristine dining room like a bad smell. "Alexandra, be serious. Women in our family don't serve." Our family. The Thompsons of Richmond, Virginia. Old money, older expectations. My great-grandfather had been a federal judge. My grandfather a senator. My father a successful corporate attorney who specialized in government contracts. We lived in a Georgian mansion in the historic district, attended the right church, belonged to the right clubs, and maintained the right connections. The idea of a Thompson daughter choosing military service over a respectable civilian career was apparently tantamount to treason. "You're throwing away your potential," my mother had said during our last real conversation 3 weeks before I shipped out to officer candidate school. "You could do anything with your intelligence, and you're choosing to waste it playing soldier." Playing soldier. Even now, 8 years later, those words still stung. I tried to explain that I wanted to serve my country, that I believed in something bigger than myself, that not everyone was cut out for cocktail parties and charity galas, but they couldn't hear me over the sound of their own disappointment. The relationship deteriorated further when I was selected for intelligence work. My assignments were classified, my deployments were secret, and my achievements were invisible. While Victoria's State Department successes were celebrated with newspaper articles and proud Facebook posts, I couldn't even tell my parents what continent I was working on. "It's like you don't exist," Victoria had said during our last phone call 3 years ago. "You disappear for months at a time, you can't tell us anything about your work, and when you do come home, you're all weird and military-ish. Military-ish. Like my service was a phase I'd grow out of, a costume I'd eventually take off." The final break came when I missed Victoria's engagement party. I'd been in Syria, coordinating the extraction of a deep-cover asset whose identity had been compromised. 48 hours of pure adrenaline, moving through hostile territory while keeping a man alive who possessed intelligence that could prevent 3 separate terrorist attacks on American soil. I couldn't tell them any of that, of course. All they knew was that I'd chosen work over family, again. "You're becoming someone we don't recognize," my mother had said when I finally called to apologize. "This obsession with your career, this coldness, this complete disregard for family obligations, it's not who we raised you to be." "Maybe," I'd replied, "who you raised me to be wasn't who I actually am." We hadn't spoken since. Now, 3 years later, Victoria was marrying a Navy officer. The irony wasn't lost on me. Apparently, military service was acceptable when it came in the form of a handsome lieutenant commander with the right last name and the right connections. Michael Sullivan came from a Navy family. His father was an admiral. His grandfather had served in World War II. Military aristocracy, the kind that looked good in wedding announcements and country club newsletters. I'd actually met Michael once, at an inter-service briefing 2 years ago. He was everything my family would love: charming, conventional, safely ambitious in all the right ways. He worked in logistics coordination, the kind of military job that translated well to civilian careers and didn't involve sneaking around in foreign countries at 3 in the morning. He'd seemed nice enough, though we'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries. Professional courtesy between officers, nothing more. The wedding invitation felt heavier in my hands than it should have. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to spend Saturday morning running through Rock Creek Park like I did every weekend, pretending my family existed in some parallel universe that occasionally sent me formal announcements. But another part of me, the part that had survived 8 years of dangerous assignments by never backing down from a challenge, wanted to show up. Not to make peace, necessarily, but to stop hiding, to stop letting them pretend I didn't exist. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Jakarta asset safely extracted, mission parameters exceeded, recommend commendation for Field Team Alpha. Well done, Commander." I smiled despite myself. Somewhere in Indonesia, a terrorist cell was wondering why their carefully planned attack on the American embassy had suddenly fallen apart. They'd never know that a 30-year-old woman from Richmond, Virginia had spent 3 sleepless nights coordinating their disruption from a basement office in Washington. But my family would never know either. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Navy's official roster. It took me less than 2 minutes to find Lieutenant Commander Michael James Sullivan's service record. Clean file, solid performance evaluations, currently assigned to Naval Supply Systems Command. His security clearance was respectable but not exceptional. His assignments had been entirely stateside. A good officer, by all accounts. Safe, predictable. Exactly the kind of man who would appeal to the Thompson family's sensibilities. I closed the laptop and stared at the wedding invitation again. At the bottom of the page, in tiny print that most people would miss, was the photographer's credit line: Crenshaw and Associates Photography, specializing in military ceremonies. Military ceremonies. Of course, they were making a big production out of the Navy connection now that it suited them. Victoria would probably wear something with subtle nautical touches, and there would definitely be an honor guard for the photographs. The same family that had been mortified by my choice to serve would now bask in the reflected glory of their daughter's military marriage. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Richmond. "Commander Thompson speaking." "Alexandra?" The voice was tentative, uncertain. It's Victoria. I felt my chest tighten. 3 years of silence, and she was calling 4 days before her wedding. "Hello, Victoria." I wasn't sure you'd answer. "I know things have been difficult between us." Difficult was one way to put it. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. "I wanted to call because—" She paused, and I could hear voices in the background, the sound of wedding preparations in full swing. "Because I hope you'll come to the wedding. I know we haven't talked, and I know Mother's invitation was probably cold, but I miss you. I miss my sister." The words hit harder than I'd expected. For 3 years, I'd told myself that the distance was mutual, that they were just as happy without me as I was without them. But Victoria's voice carried a vulnerability I remembered from when we were children, when she'd climb into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to tell her stories until she fell asleep. "Victoria?" I started, then stopped. What was there to say? That I missed her too? That I'd spent 3 years pretending not to care while secretly hoping one of them would reach out first? "I know you can't talk about your work," she continued, "and I know we haven't understood your choices, but you're my sister, my only sister, and I want you there when I get married." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of stubborn pride settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Thank you, that's all I can ask." After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my office, surrounded by the tools of my invisible war, and wondered if there was a way to bridge the gap between who my family wanted me to be and who I'd actually become. The wedding invitation sat on my desk like a challenge, a test of whether blood really was thicker than pride. I had 3 days to decide. 3 days to figure out if Commander Alexandra Thompson could find a way to be Victoria's sister again, even if it was just for one afternoon. Friday afternoon found me standing in my apartment closet staring at clothes I hadn't worn in 3 years. The problem with living a classified life was that most of my wardrobe consisted of tactical gear, dress uniforms, and casual clothes suitable for blending into foreign crowds. I owned exactly one civilian dress appropriate for a high society wedding, and it was buried behind a rack of deployment bags. The navy blue cocktail dress still had the tags on it. I'd bought it for a State Department reception 2 years ago, then ended up in Belarus instead, tracking arms dealers through Minsk's underground markets. The dress had been waiting patiently ever since, like a costume for a role I'd never learned to play. My phone buzzed with another encrypted message from Lieutenant Mitchell. "Ma'am, Admiral Peterson wants to brief you on the Lagos situation before you leave. Can you be here by 1600? I typed back quickly. "On my way." The drive from my Arlington apartment to the Pentagon normally took 20 minutes, but Friday afternoon traffic stretched it to 45. I used the time to call my apartment building's concierge and arrange for someone to pick up my dry cleaning. If I was really doing this, if I was actually going to Victoria's wedding, I needed to look the part. The Lagos briefing was exactly what I'd expected. Another crisis brewing in West Africa, another situation that would require weeks of careful coordination to resolve, without anyone knowing we'd been involved. Admiral Peterson handed me a thick folder marked with classification stamps. "This one's going to be delicate, Thompson. The Nigerian government is cooperative, but barely. We need surgical precision." I flipped through the intelligence reports, my mind automatically cataloging extraction routes and safehouse locations. Timeline? 2 weeks. Maybe 3, depends on how quickly our asset can get close to the target. 2 weeks. I'd be back from Richmond by Sunday night, which meant I could throw myself into Lagos and forget all about wedding cake and family drama. The thought was oddly comforting. "I'll have preliminary operational plans ready by Monday morning," I said. Peterson nodded, then hesitated. "Thompson, you're taking the weekend off, right? When's the last time you actually took leave?" I couldn't remember. Probably Christmas, but I'd spent that Christmas in Qatar, so it hardly counted. "I'm attending a family function this weekend, sir." "Good, you need it. Try to remember what normal people do with their spare time." Normal people. If only he knew. The drive to Richmond took 3 hours through Virginia countryside that grew more familiar with every mile. I'd taken this route hundreds of times as a child, sitting in the back of my father's BMW while he lectured Victoria and me about the importance of family reputation and public service. Back then, I'd thought public service meant charity galas and hospital boards. It had never occurred to me that it might mean crawling through Syrian ruins at midnight to prevent a chemical weapons attack. My parents still lived in the same house where I'd grown up, a Georgian colonial on Monument Avenue that had been in the Thompson family for 4 generations. The neighborhood was a museum of Confederate monuments and old money, where every house came with a historic plaque and a trust fund. I drove past without stopping, checking into a Marriott downtown instead. The last thing I needed was to spend the night under the same roof as people who considered my career choice a personal betrayal. The hotel room was generic in that comforting chain hotel way: beige walls, floral bedspread, a view of the James River through windows that didn't open. I unpacked my single overnight bag and hung the navy dress in the closet, where it looked even more like a costume. My secure phone rang as I was ordering room service. Thompson. Commander, it's Captain Rodriguez from NCIS. We have a situation developing in Norfolk, possible security breach at the naval shipyard. I sat down heavily on the bed. Details? Someone's been accessing classified submarine blueprints without proper authorization. Digital forensics suggests an inside job. Of course, because normal people got to attend family weddings without worrying about national security breaches. Has Admiral Peterson been notified? He's the one who told me to call you, says you have the clearance and the expertise to handle this quietly. I looked at my watch. 7 p.m. on Friday. The wedding was tomorrow at 4. If I left now, I could be in Norfolk by 9, spend the night investigating, and still make it back to Richmond by Saturday afternoon. I'll be there in 2 hours, I said. The Norfolk Naval Shipyard at night was a maze of security checkpoints and floodlit concrete. Captain Rodriguez met me at the main gate, her expression grim in the harsh artificial light. The suspect is Petty Officer First Class Daniel Reeves, she said as we walked toward the administrative building. 10 years of exemplary service, top secret clearance, no red flags in his background investigation. Financial problems? Personal issues? Nothing obvious. That's what makes this so concerning. We spent 4 hours going through Reeves' digital footprint, tracking his access logs, and reviewing security footage. The evidence was damning but incomplete. Someone with his credentials had definitely been copying sensitive information, but the digital trail was almost too clean, too obvious. This feels like a setup, I told Rodriguez as we reviewed the final batch of security logs. Either Reeves is the most careless spy in history, or someone wants us to think he's guilty. That's what I was thinking too, but who would want to frame him? That was the million-dollar question. By 3 a.m., we'd identified 6 other personnel with access to the same systems and similar clearance levels. Any one of them could have used Reeves' credentials to access the submarine blueprints. We need a full counterintelligence investigation, I said finally. Start with everyone who has both access and motive, financial stress, recent divorces, family members with foreign connections. Rodriguez nodded wearily. I'll get the ball rolling. Thanks for coming down, Commander. I know you probably had better things to do on a Friday night. I almost laughed. Better things like rehearsing small talk with people who thought my life's work was a phase I'd grow out of. Keep me updated, I said instead. This one has my full attention. The drive back to Richmond at 4 in the morning was surreal. Empty highways and sleeping towns. The world peaceful and unaware that someone was potentially selling submarine secrets to foreign powers. I'd prevented 3 terrorist attacks this year, disrupted 2 arms-dealing operations, and coordinated the safe extraction of intelligence assets from 4 different countries. But none of that would matter to my family, because none of it could be discussed at cocktail parties. I pulled into the hotel parking lot as the sun was coming up, exhausted but oddly energized. The Norfolk investigation had reminded me why I'd chosen this life, why the invisible battles mattered more than visible recognition. In my hotel room, I set 3 alarms and managed to sleep for 5 hours. When I woke up, there were 17 missed calls from various Pentagon extensions and 4 encrypted messages that would have to wait until after the wedding. The shower was hot and the coffee was strong, and for the first time in 3 years, I was about to willingly walk into a room full of people who knew my name but had no idea who I really was. I put on the navy dress, pinned my hair into something that looked appropriately civilian, and checked myself in the mirror. I looked like a successful professional attending a wedding, which was true, as far as it went. What the mirror couldn't show was that the woman in the navy dress had spent the previous night investigating possible treason, that she carried a security clearance higher than most senators, or that she'd personally briefed the President of the United States on 3 separate occasions. My family was about to see Victoria's successful sister, the one who'd finally learned to dress appropriately for social functions. They had no idea they were about to meet Commander Alexandra Thompson. St. Michael's Cathedral looked like something out of a wedding magazine. White roses cascaded from every pew, and afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across marble floors that probably cost more than most people's houses. A string quartet played softly in the corner while guests filed in wearing the kind of understated elegance that screamed old money. I stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching Richmond's social elite emerge from their luxury cars like participants in some elaborate pageant. The women wore pastel dresses with pearls, their hair styled in variations of the same conservative cut. The men sported navy blazers and perfectly knotted ties, their handshakes firm and their smiles practiced. This was my sister's world now. These were her people. I recognized many of the faces from newspaper society pages and charity event photographs. Judge Harrison Williams and his wife Margaret, pillars of Richmond society, who'd attended every important wedding for the past 30 years. The Ashford family, who owned half the commercial real estate downtown. Dr. Patricia Whitman, who ran the city's most exclusive medical practice and had never treated a patient who couldn't afford her rates. And there, greeting guests near the cathedral entrance, were my parents. Eleanor Thompson wore a pale yellow dress that complemented her silver hair, every inch the perfect mother of the bride. She'd aged gracefully, the way wealthy women do when they have access to the best of everything. My father, Judge William Thompson, stood beside her in his customary navy suit, the same uniform he'd worn to every formal event for the past 20 years. They looked exactly as I remembered them. Polished, proper, and completely in control of their environment. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the cathedral. Alexandra? The voice belonged to Mrs. Catherine Pemberton, our next-door neighbor from childhood. She'd aged considerably since I'd last seen her, but her eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had made her both fascinating and terrifying to 8-year-old me. Mrs. Pemberton, I said, forcing a smile, how nice to see you. My goodness, dear, you look different, more serious somehow. Her gaze swept over me, appraising Ly. I heard you joined the military. How unusual. The word unusual carried the weight of a complete character assassination. The Navy, I corrected gently. Yes, well, I'm sure it's been educational. She paused, clearly searching for something appropriately condescending to say. And what exactly do you do in the Navy, dear? Administrative work mostly. Her expression brightened slightly, as if administrative work was at least comprehensible, even if it wasn't respectable. Well, I suppose someone has to do the paperwork, though I always thought you'd follow in your father's footsteps. Such a waste of potential. Before I could respond, she'd already moved on to greet someone more worthy of her attention. I continued toward the cathedral entrance, where my parents were still playing their roles as gracious hosts. My mother spotted me first, her smile freezing for just a moment before smoothing back into practiced perfection. Alexandra, she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to sound maternal to anyone listening. You came? Hello, Mother. She leaned in for the kind of air kiss that looked affectionate from a distance but involved no actual physical contact. You look presentable, she said quietly. Though I wish you'd done something with your hair. My father's greeting was even cooler. A handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds, and a nod that acknowledged my presence without expressing any particular pleasure about it. Alexandra, I trust the drive from Washington wasn't too difficult. Not at all. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of arriving guests and the string quartet's subdued melodies. Well, my mother said finally, you should find your seat. The ceremony will begin shortly. She handed me a program without looking at it, and I realized with a sinking heart that I wasn't listed anywhere in the wedding party. Not as a bridesmaid, not as a reader, not even as family to be acknowledged. I was just another guest, no more important than Mrs. Pemberton or the Ashfords. Inside the cathedral, I found my assigned seat in the 4th row, behind family friends but ahead of distant relatives and work colleagues. The placement was deliberate, close enough to be seen, far enough away to be ignored. The seat next to me was occupied by Robert Ashford III, a contemporary of my father's who'd made his fortune in banking. He glanced at my program, then at me with obvious confusion. "Thompson," he mused, "are you related to the bride?" "I'm her sister." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Really? I didn't realize Victoria had a sister. She's never mentioned." He trailed off, apparently realizing that finishing that sentence would be awkward for everyone involved. "I've been away," I said simply. "Ah, college? Career?" "Military service." The temperature of our conversation dropped several degrees. "I see. Well, that's noble, I suppose." Noble. Like I was a well-meaning but misguided child who'd chosen to volunteer at an animal shelter instead of pursuing a real career. The ceremony began with a processional that looked like a casting call for Southern aristocracy. Victoria's bridesmaids glided down the aisle in pale pink dresses, each one perfectly coordinated with the floral arrangements and the stained glass windows. They were her sorority sisters from Duke, her colleagues from the State Department, and her closest friends from Richmond society, young women who'd never questioned whether they belonged in this world because they'd been born into it. Then came Victoria herself, radiant in white silk and family pearls, her arm linked through my father's as he prepared to give her away. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, every detail perfect from her cathedral-length veil to her imported Italian shoes. She was beautiful, poised, and completely at home in this cathedral full of people who considered her their natural successor to Richmond's social throne. At the altar, Lieutenant Commander Michael Sullivan waited in his dress-white uniform, looking exactly like Central Casting's idea of a military groom. Tall, handsome, decorated but not dangerously so. The kind of officer who looked good in photographs and would transition seamlessly to a civilian career in defense contracting or corporate consulting. The ceremony proceeded with clockwork precision. Traditional vows, classical music, readings from scripture that emphasized duty and submission, and the importance of maintaining proper social order. Everything designed to reinforce the idea that Victoria and Michael were not just joining their lives, but cementing an alliance between appropriate families with appropriate values. During the exchange of rings, I caught Michael's eye for just a moment. He looked in my direction with what might have been curiosity, but the distance between us was too great to be sure. "By the power vested in me," the priest intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was brief and tasteful, followed by applause that echoed through the cathedral like rolling thunder. As Victoria and Michael processed back down the aisle, I noticed how naturally she'd taken his arm, how perfectly they moved together, how completely she belonged in this moment. The receiving line after the ceremony was a masterclass in social maneuvering. Victoria and Michael positioned themselves near the cathedral doors, flanked by both sets of parents, greeting each guest with personal attention and perfect recall of names, relationships, and recent accomplishments. When my turn came, Victoria's smile never faltered. "Alex, I'm so glad you made it." She hugged me with what appeared to be genuine warmth, though I noticed she was careful not to wrinkle her dress. "You look wonderful." "Congratulations, Victoria, you look beautiful." "Thank you, and thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." Michael stepped forward, extending his hand with military precision. "You must be the famous sister I've heard so much about. I'm Michael Sullivan." Famous sister. I wondered what exactly he'd heard, and from whom. "Alexandra Thompson, congratulations on your marriage." His handshake was firm, professional, exactly what I'd expected from his service record. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition that seemed odd, considering we'd barely interacted during our brief meeting 2 years ago. "Thank you. I hope we'll have a chance to talk more at the reception." Before I could respond, the line had moved on, and I was swept away by the tide of guests heading toward their cars for the short drive to the Jefferson Hotel. The reception venue was even more elaborate than the cathedral. The Jefferson's ballroom had been transformed into something that belonged in European royalty's wedding album, rather than a Richmond hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory linens, while massive floral arrangements created intimate conversation areas throughout the space. I found my assigned table near the back of the room, far from the head table where the wedding party held court. My table mates were a collection of distant relatives and family friends, who'd clearly been seated together because no one was quite sure what to do with them. "Oh, you're Eleanor's other daughter," said Aunt Margaret, my father's sister whom I hadn't seen since I was 16. "I wondered what happened to you. Someone said you'd joined the circus." "The Navy," I corrected. "Close enough," she said with a laugh that suggested she thought she was being witty. Dinner conversation revolved around safe topics: the weather, the lovely ceremony, Victoria's beautiful dress, Michael's promising career prospects. No one asked about my work, my deployments, or my life in Washington. I might as well have spent the last 8 years in suspended animation. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying the other guests, noting the easy intimacy of shared experiences and common references. These people had all grown up in the same world, attended the same schools, married within the same social circle. They spoke a language of insider jokes and mutual acquaintances that I'd once understood but had somehow forgotten during my years away. I was watching this elaborate social dance from the outside, like an anthropologist observing a tribe whose customs had become foreign to me. And then the toasts began. The first toast came from Michael's father, Admiral Robert Sullivan, a distinguished man whose chest full of ribbons told the story of 3 decades of honorable service. He spoke eloquently about duty, honor, and the sacred bond of marriage, his words carrying the weight of someone who understood sacrifice and commitment. "To Victoria and Michael," he concluded, raising his champagne glass, "may your union be blessed with the same strength and dedication that has guided both your families for generations." Polite applause rippled through the ballroom. I found myself genuinely moved by the Admiral's words, recognizing in them the values that had drawn me to military service in the first place. The second toast came from Victoria's maid of honor, a Duke's sorority sister named Caroline, who regaled the crowd with stories of college adventures and shared dreams. It was sweet, personal, exactly what a best friend's wedding toast should be. Then my father stood up. Judge William Thompson commanded attention the way only a man accustomed to wielding authority could. The ballroom fell silent as he adjusted his tie and smiled at the assembled guests with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, as the father of the bride, I'd like to share a few thoughts about my daughter Victoria." He paused, allowing the moment to build, his courtroom instincts serving him well even in this social setting. When Victoria was 12 years old, she announced that she wanted to work for the State Department. Not because it sounded exciting or glamorous, but because she wanted to serve her country through diplomacy and international relations. Murmurs of approval from the crowd. Victoria beamed from the head table, her hand resting on Michael's arm. That same year, she began studying French, then Spanish, then Mandarin. She joined the debate team, the Model United Nations, and every academic club that would prepare her for her chosen career. She had a plan, you see, and the discipline to follow it. More approving nods. This was the kind of story Richmond society loved. A young person with proper ambitions, and the breeding to achieve them. Victoria understood something that many young people struggle with, that true success comes from choosing a path that honors both your talents and your responsibilities to family and community. His eyes swept the room, briefly landing on me before moving on. She never wavered from her goals, never allowed herself to be distracted by unconventional choices or rebellious phases. She understood that real service to one's country happens through established institutions, through proper channels, through careers that build bridges rather than burning them. The pause was deliberate, calculated. Several guests followed his gaze toward my table, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. Victoria chose diplomacy over conflict, collaboration over confrontation, building relationships over breaking them. She chose to serve her country in a way that brought honor to the Thompson name and pride to her family. He raised his glass, his voice growing stronger. So tonight we celebrate not just a marriage, but a young woman who understood that the highest form of patriotism is using your gifts in service of something larger than yourself, while never forgetting the responsibilities you owe to those who raised you and supported you. The applause was thunderous. Victoria wiped tears from her eyes, clearly moved by her father's praise. Michael nodded approvingly, his admiral father beaming with satisfaction at this perfect expression of proper values. And everyone in the room understood exactly what my father had really said, that Victoria was the good daughter, the successful daughter, the daughter who'd chosen the right path and brought honor to the family name. Unlike her sister, my mother stood next, elegant in her yellow dress, her smile radiant as she looked toward the head table. "I want to share something about Victoria that many of you might not know," she began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom. When she was accepted to Duke University, she received offers from 5 other prestigious schools. Full scholarships, academic honors, the works. She paused to sip her champagne, building suspense, like the accomplished hostess she was. But Victoria chose Duke because their international relations program had the best reputation for producing State Department leaders. She didn't chase the money or the prestige or the easiest path. She chose the program that would best prepare her for the career she'd wanted since childhood. More appreciative murmurs. Victoria's career trajectory was being presented as evidence of superior character and family values. That's the kind of daughter Victoria has always been: thoughtful, strategic, committed to excellence. She's never made an impulsive decision, never chosen immediate gratification over long-term success, never put her own desires ahead of family stability. The emphasis on never was subtle but unmistakable. Some children, my mother continued, her tone growing slightly cooler, go through phases where they need to find themselves. They make choices that worry their parents, that strain family relationships, that seem designed more to prove independence than to build meaningful lives. She wasn't looking at me, but she didn't need to. Half the room had already figured out who she was talking about. But Victoria has always known who she was and what she wanted. She's never needed to run away from home to discover her identity, never needed to reject family values to feel authentic, never confused rebellion with strength. The words hit like precision strikes, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Tonight we celebrate a daughter who chose to build rather than tear down, who chose commitment over abandonment, who chose to honor her family rather than embarrass them. She raised her glass with a smile that looked warm and maternal to anyone who didn't know her well. To Victoria and Michael, may your marriage be blessed with the same wisdom, loyalty, and dedication to family that Victoria has shown throughout her life. The applause was even more enthusiastic this time. Several guests were openly dabbing at their eyes, moved by what they perceived as a mother's heartfelt tribute to her daughter's character. I sat frozen in my chair, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. Some guests were staring openly now, no longer bothering to hide their curiosity about the family black sheep, who'd apparently provided such a useful contrast to the bride's perfection. But the humiliation wasn't over. Victoria herself stood to respond to the toasts, radiant in the spotlight, every inch the gracious bride. "Thank you so much, Daddy, for those beautiful words. And Mother, I'm not crying, you're crying," she laughed, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin while the crowd chuckled appreciatively. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate with Michael and me. Having all of our family and friends in one place means the world to us." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room with practiced ease. "Family is everything to me. The values my parents instilled, the example they set, the unconditional love and support they've given me throughout my life. That's the foundation of who I am today." Her voice grew more serious, more heartfelt. "I know how lucky I am to have parents who believed in me, who supported my dreams, who never made me choose between following my ambitions and maintaining family relationships. That kind of stability, that kind of unwavering support, it's what allowed me to take risks in my career, to pursue challenging assignments, to serve my country with confidence." She looked directly at the head table, where my parents sat beaming with pride. Some people think that choosing family loyalty means limiting your options or compromising your independence. But I've learned that the opposite is true. When you have a strong family foundation, when you know you're loved and supported unconditionally, that's when you have the courage to achieve great things. The irony was breathtaking. Victoria was describing exactly the opposite of what I'd experienced. Parents who'd withdrawn their support the moment I chose a path they didn't approve of, who'd made me choose between family acceptance and personal authenticity. I also want to acknowledge that family relationships aren't always easy. Sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes they make choices that are hard to understand. Sometimes they prioritize other things over family connections. Now she was looking directly at me, her expression carefully neutral but her meaning crystal clear. But I believe that love is stronger than disappointment, that forgiveness is stronger than pride, and that family bonds can survive even the most challenging circumstances. The word challenging hung in the air like an indictment. So to my family, all of my family, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your love, your patience, and your willingness to celebrate this new chapter in my life, regardless of any past difficulties or differences of opinion. She raised her glass one final time. To family, to forgiveness, and to the hope that love really can conquer all. The applause was deafening. Victoria had managed to sound magnanimous and forgiving, while simultaneously painting herself as the long-suffering saint who'd graciously welcomed back her prodigal sister despite years of family disappointment. I was no longer just the cautionary tale. I was the redemption story. The wayward daughter whose presence at the wedding proved Victoria's superior capacity for Christian forgiveness and family loyalty. As the applause died down and conversations resumed, I found myself surrounded by curious glances and whispered speculation. I'd become the evening's entertainment, the family drama that would fuel gossip at Richmond's social events for months to come. My secure phone buzzed against my thigh. Another message about the Norfolk investigation or the Lagos situation, reminders of a world where my value wasn't measured by my willingness to conform to other people's expectations. But for the first time in 8 years, that world felt very far away. The band had just begun playing for the first dance when my secure phone vibrated again. This time, the message was marked with the highest priority classification, the kind that meant someone, somewhere, was in immediate danger. I slipped out of the ballroom and into the hotel corridor, finding a quiet alcove near the restrooms where I could read the encrypted text without being overheard. Flash traffic, Lagos operation compromised, asset in immediate danger, extraction required within 6 hours, presidential authorization granted. Your presence required for operational command, Admiral Peterson. I stared at the message, my mind automatically shifting into crisis mode. Lagos was 8 hours ahead of Richmond time, which meant it was already Sunday morning there. Our asset, a deep-cover operative who'd spent 3 years infiltrating a terrorist network planning attacks on American oil facilities, had somehow been exposed. 6 hours to extraction meant we had until midnight Lagos time, before the situation became irretrievable. After that, we'd lose not just the asset but potentially the intelligence that could prevent attacks on American interests across West Africa. I was already calculating logistics, flights to Ramstein Air Base, connection to Lagos, equipment and personnel required for emergency extraction, when footsteps echoed in the corridor behind me. "Alexandra?" I turned to find Michael Sullivan approaching, his dress whites immaculate, his expression concerned. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, sliding the phone back into my purse. "I just needed some air. The reception is beautiful." He stopped a few feet away, studying my face with an intensity that seemed odd for someone who barely knew me. "That wasn't a social phone call, was it?" he said quietly. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'm sorry?" "The way you're standing, the expression on your face, the fact that you checked your 6 before reading that message." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That's not how civilians handle personal emergencies." We stared at each other in the empty corridor, and I realized that Michael Sullivan knew exactly who I was. "Commander Thompson," he said formally, then immediately caught himself. "Sorry, I probably shouldn't." How do you know that name? He glanced around the corridor, making sure we were alone. Joint Chiefs briefing, 18 months ago. Counterterrorism Task Force review. You were listed as operational commander for the Syrian chemical weapons interdiction. My blood ran cold. That operation was classified at levels that shouldn't have been accessible to a supply logistics officer. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, I said carefully, your clearance level shouldn't have included operational details. No, he agreed, it shouldn't have. But Admiral Peterson specifically requested that certain logistics personnel be briefed on that mission because of the specialized equipment requirements. Admiral Peterson, Michael had been read into one of my operations because his father's connections had gotten him assigned to high-level logistics support. The briefing materials just listed you as Operational Commander Thompson, he continued. No first name, no photo, no background information. But when Victoria mentioned her sister's name was Alexandra and that she was in the Navy, you put it together. It took me 6 months to work up the courage to ask Admiral Peterson directly. He wouldn't confirm anything officially, but he did mention that Commander A. Thompson was one of the finest officers he'd ever had the privilege to work with. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. For 3 years, I'd believed that my family's rejection was evidence of my failure to balance career and relationships. But here was someone who understood both worlds, and he was looking at me with something approaching awe. The Lagos situation, I said, making a decision that would have gotten me court-martialed if anyone had been listening. How much do you know about current West African operations? His eyes widened slightly. Enough to know that if you're getting flash traffic on a Saturday night, someone's life is probably hanging in the balance. I nodded once. That was all the confirmation I could give, but it was enough. How long do you have? He asked. 6 hours. From now? From when the message was sent, so maybe 5.5. Michael checked his watch, his expression growing grim. There's no commercial flight that would get you to Washington in time for military transport to Africa. I know. But there is a Navy helicopter at Langley that could have you at Andrews Air Force Base in 90 minutes. I stared at him. How could you possibly know that? Because I helped coordinate the logistics for your last 3 operations. Admiral Peterson has been using me as an unofficial liaison for high-priority transport requirements. My mind was reeling. You've been supporting my missions? For the past 2 years. Equipment manifest for Syria, extraction coordination for Belarus, medical support for the Somalia operation. He paused. I've been wondering when I'd finally meet the legendary Commander Thompson. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the ballroom. The first dance was ending, which meant the father-daughter dance would be next. If I was going to slip away unnoticed, I needed to do it now. I have to go, I said. I know, but Alexandra, he stopped himself, then continued more formally. Commander Thompson, what your family did to you in there, what they said. They have no idea who you really are. It doesn't matter. It does matter. You've saved more American lives than most people will ever know about. You've prevented terrorist attacks, disrupted arms trafficking, coordinated operations that kept this country safe while they were in there complaining about your career choices. His voice was growing more intense, more passionate. Do you have any idea how many intelligence officers I've worked with who would kill for half your operational record? How many senior commanders consider you the gold standard for strategic thinking under pressure? I felt tears threatening for the first time all evening, not from hurt but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of being understood by someone who grasped the significance of work that had to remain invisible. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For reminding me who I am. He nodded once, then seemed to make a decision of his own. Commander Thompson, would you mind if I borrowed your authority for a moment? What do you mean? Instead of answering, he turned and walked back toward the ballroom. I followed, confused but curious. Michael stepped through the ballroom doors and moved purposefully toward the bandstand, where the musicians were setting up for the father-daughter dance. He spoke briefly to the band leader, who nodded and stepped away from the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael's voice carried clearly through the ballroom sound system, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The crowd turned toward him, expecting another toast or perhaps an announcement about the evening's schedule. Victoria looked puzzled but pleased that her new husband was taking such an active role in hosting their reception. Before we continue with the evening's festivities, I wanted to take a moment to recognize someone very special who's here with us tonight. My stomach dropped. Surely he wouldn't. As many of you know, I've had the privilege of serving in the United States Navy for the past 8 years. It's been an honor to work alongside some of the finest men and women this country has ever produced. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine near the back of the room. Tonight, we're in the presence of one of those exceptional individuals. Someone whose service to our nation has been exemplary, whose dedication to protecting American lives has been absolute, and whose operational achievements have earned the respect of senior leadership throughout the defense establishment. The room had gone completely silent. Victoria's smile was beginning to look strained. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to join me in recognizing Commander Alexandra Thompson, United States Navy. The ballroom erupted in confusion. Heads turned toward my table, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning comprehension. Michael wasn't finished. Commander Thompson currently serves as Operational Director for one of the Navy's most classified intelligence units. She has coordinated counterterrorism operations on 4 continents, prevented multiple attacks on American soil, and personally directed the successful extraction of intelligence assets from hostile territories around the world. My father's face had gone completely white. My mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning. In fact, Michael continued, his voice growing stronger, Commander Thompson is currently required for an emergency operational briefing related to ongoing threats to American interests overseas. She'll be leaving tonight to coordinate what I can only describe as a matter of national security. He raised his champagne glass, his gesture somehow managing to be both respectful and defiant. So before she departs on yet another mission to keep all of us safe, I wanted to ensure that everyone in this room understands exactly who we're privileged to have among us tonight. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Admiral Sullivan stood up, his own glass raised. To Commander Thompson, he said simply. One by one, other guests began to stand. Not everyone. Some were too shocked to move, others too confused to understand what was happening. But enough people rose that the gesture became unmistakable. A room full of Richmond's elite, offering a toast to the woman they'd spent the evening treating as a family embarrassment. Victoria was still sitting, her face a mask of frozen shock. My parents remained in their seats, looking like they'd been caught in a lie that had just exploded in public. But around the room, glasses were raised in recognition of service they'd never known existed, sacrifices they'd never bothered to acknowledge, achievements that dwarfed anything discussed in their usual social conversations. For the first time in 8 years, I was being seen for who I really was. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't ashamed to be a Thompson. The ballroom remained frozen in tableau for several long seconds. Guests half standing with raised glasses, my parents staring in shock, Victoria looking like she'd been slapped. The only sound was the distant hum of air conditioning and the faint clink of crystal, as someone's trembling hand caused their champagne flute to wobble. I stood slowly, nodding once to Michael in acknowledgement, then began walking toward the exit. I had a mission to coordinate, lives to save, and exactly 4 hours to get from Richmond to Andrews Air Force Base. But my father's voice stopped me before I reached the ballroom doors. Alexandra, wait! The command in his tone was unmistakable. 30 years of courtroom authority compressed into 2 words. I turned to find him approaching, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been panic. We need to talk, he said quietly, privately. I glanced at my watch. I have 3 minutes. He gestured toward a small conference room off the main ballroom, the kind hotels used for business meetings during the day. We stepped inside, and he closed the door behind us, the sudden quiet making the space feel airless and confined. Is it true? He asked without preamble. What he said about your work? Which part? All of it. The counterterrorism, the classified operations, he struggled with the words. The national security implications. I studied his face, seeing for the first time in 8 years something other than disappointment in his eyes. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that he'd fundamentally misjudged something important. It's true. He sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs, suddenly looking older than his 63 years. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "Tell you what, exactly? That I couldn't discuss my work because it was classified? I tried that. You decided it meant I was being evasive. But if we'd known the scope of what you were doing, what difference would it have made?" I asked. "Would you have been proud of me if you'd known I was preventing terrorist attacks, instead of just, quote, playing soldier? Would Mother have introduced me differently at charity events if she'd known I was coordinating intelligence operations instead of doing, quote, administrative work?" He flinched at the reminder of our family's casual dismissal of my career. "You have to understand," he said. "We were told that your assignments were routine, that you were essentially a desk officer." "Who told you that?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. When you first commissioned, I made some inquiries. Called a few contacts at the Pentagon, asked about your career prospects." My blood went cold. "You investigated my military service?" "Not investigated. I just wanted to understand what you'd gotten yourself into, whether there were opportunities for advancement, whether you were making the right choice." "And what did they tell you?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That you were assigned to administrative support functions, that your security clearance was standard for junior officers, that your work primarily involved paperwork and coordination." I stared at him, pieces falling into place. "Dad, what kind of clearance did you have when you worked on those defense contract cases?" "Secret. Standard for attorneys handling government work." "And you thought that gave you access to information about classified intelligence operations?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. "They gave you a cover story," I said finally. "When you called asking about your daughter's Navy career, they told you exactly what they tell everyone who doesn't have a need to know. Administrative work, routine assignments, nothing sensitive." His face was pale now, the full scope of his mistake becoming clear. "For 8 years, you've been judging my career based on a deliberate misdirection designed to protect operational security. You've been disappointed in me for work that doesn't exist, while dismissing achievements you were never supposed to know about." "Alexandra, I have to go," I said, checking my watch again. "There's an intelligence asset in Lagos who's going to die if I don't coordinate his extraction in the next 3 hours." I turned toward the door, but his voice stopped me again. "How do we fix this?" I looked back at him, this man who'd shaped my understanding of duty and service, who'd taught me to value justice and integrity, who'd somehow convinced himself that those principles didn't apply when his daughter chose to serve them in uniform. "You don't," I said quietly. "You learn to live with the fact that for 8 years you rejected a daughter who was risking her life to protect everything you claimed to value." The door opened before I could reach it, and my mother stepped inside, her yellow dress rumpled and her perfect composure finely cracked. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice shrill with something between anger and panic. "What that man said about you?" "Hello, Mother." "Don't hello, Mother, me, Alexandra. Answer the question. Are you really some kind of spy?" "I'm a naval intelligence officer specializing in counterterrorism operations." She stared at me like I'd announced I was an alien. "But that's not what you told us." "I told you I worked in intelligence. You decided that meant filing reports." "Because that's what intelligent women do in the military. They use their education for analytical work, not whatever it is you've been doing." The words hung in the air, revealing the fundamental assumption that had poisoned our relationship from the beginning, that military service was acceptable for Thompson women only if it was sufficiently removed from actual military activities. "Mother, what exactly did you think intelligence work meant?" "Research, analysis, maybe some translation work. Civilized applications of intellectual ability, not running around in dangerous situations like some kind of action movie character." I felt a laugh building in my chest, bitter and exhausted. "You wanted me to be a military librarian." "I wanted you to be safe," she snapped. "I wanted you to use your brain instead of risking your life for strangers who will never know your name or appreciate your sacrifice. And if those strangers happen to include American civilians who would have died in terrorist attacks that I helped prevent." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, the logic of her position finally colliding with reality. My secure phone buzzed against my leg. Another urgent message that I couldn't ignore any longer. "I have to leave," I said, "right now." "Alexandra, wait," my mother said, her voice suddenly smaller. "We need to talk about this properly. We need to understand." "What you need to understand," I said, "is that I've been doing exactly what you raised me to do. I've been serving my country, protecting innocent people, and using every skill you helped me develop to make the world safer." I paused at the door, looking back at both of them. The only difference is that I chose to do it in a way that actually matters, instead of in a way that looks good at cocktail parties. I left them standing in that conference room, two people finally forced to confront the gap between their assumptions and reality, and walked quickly through the hotel lobby toward the parking garage. Victoria caught up with me as I reached my rental car, her wedding dress making soft rustling sounds as she hurried across the concrete. "Alex, please. Don't leave like this." I turned to face my sister, this woman who'd spent the evening basking in praise for virtues I'd been demonstrating invisibly for years. "Congratulations on your marriage, Victoria. Michael seems like a good man." "He is. And he obviously thinks very highly of you. He understands what I do for a living. That makes him almost unique in our family." She flinched at the accusation. "We didn't know." "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." "That's not fair. Isn't it?" I pulled out my car keys, anxious to get moving. "Victoria, you've spent 8 years building a career in diplomacy, working to prevent conflicts and protect American interests abroad. Do you think that's important work?" "Of course. So do I, which is why I've spent 8 years doing the same thing, just with different tools and higher stakes." She stared at me, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "We're on the same side, Victoria. We always have been. You just decided that my way of serving was somehow less legitimate than yours." "I never said that." "You didn't have to, neither did Mother or Dad. You said it with every conversation about my phase, every reference to my career problems, every assumption that I was wasting my potential instead of fulfilling it." I opened the car door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Your work at State matters, and you're good at it. I just wish you'd extended me the same professional courtesy." As I drove away from the Jefferson Hotel, Richmond's lights fading in my rearview mirror, my secure phone rang with Admiral Peterson's direct line. "Thompson here. Alexandra, thank God, are you en route? 20 minutes to Andrews. What's the situation update?" "Asset is alive but exposed. We have a narrow extraction window opening at 0400 Lagos time. I need you running point on this operation." "Understood, sir. I'll be airborne within the hour." As the phone call ended and Virginia countryside flashed past my windows, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For 8 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disappointment, questioning whether I'd made the right choice, wondering if their rejection was evidence that I'd failed at something important. But tonight had clarified everything. I hadn't failed at being a Thompson. I'd succeeded at being something more important. I'd succeeded at being myself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.